Hi, I'm Bob McCoskrie, National Director of Family First New Zealand. Dr. Miriam Grossman is a US psychiatrist specialising in adolescent and child psychiatry. She recently came to New Zealand to speak at the annual New Zealand Forum on the Family, and during that time she spoke to a group of Auckland principals and boards of trustees and teachers about the sex education curriculum and her concerns about it. Thank you for taking the time to watch her presentation. Now, here's Dr. Miriam Grossman.
Thank you, Bob. When I graduated from medical school, I took an oath. I stood up, I raised my right hand, and I swore to prevent disease whenever I could. At that moment, I believed that the battles that lay ahead of me would be against cancer, heart disease, and emotional disorders. But after 2 decades and thousands of hours with young patients in distress, I've discovered that my most challenging fight is not against dangerous diseases, but against dangerous ideas. I'm referring to ideas that are central to what I'm going to call the sex ed industry. This industry began in the United States, and like many ill-conceived notions from America, it's been quite successfully exported to the rest of the world. At the helm of the sex industry here are organizations like Family Planning and Rainbow Youth. From my review of the websites and other material that these groups have created for New Zealand youth, I see that the approach that I'm so familiar with from the States has been duplicated in your country. Now, as a physician, I have one objective: to keep people out of the offices of doctors and therapists. I'm going to demonstrate to you today how the sex ed industry makes my job more difficult. And I know that that's a strong statement to make, but the priority of groups like Family Planning is not sexual health. It is sexual freedom. The goal of these government-funded organizations is for students to be open to just about any sexual activity. Children are told that sexuality extends from cradle to grave. Early sexual activity with multiple partners is assumed, and high-risk behaviors are normalized, and an attitude of openness and adventure is celebrated. Now, these, of course, are the very behaviors that fuel the epidemics of genital infections, unwanted pregnancies, abortion, and emotional distress, whether or not a condom is used. Young people who practice the lifestyle endorsed by these groups have more doctor's appointments, not less. And that is so for a simple reason. When sexual freedom is the priority, when young people are given the okay to become sexually active and to explore and experiment with multiple partners, they do just that, and their sexual health suffers. You don't need a PhD in public health to understand this. All you need is common sense. Now, these problems are not abstractions to me. I'm reporting to you from the front line. Over the past 25 years, I've seen a steady stream of people come through my office who were suffering from the sexual decisions that they had made. Their suffering was 100% avoidable. To make matters worse, there wasn't much I could do for them because it was after the fact. Now, I'm not speaking about an occasional patient. I'm not even speaking about a few dozen patients. I'm saying that I have lost count of the number of patients that I've seen, most of them girls and young women, who have been diagnosed with a sexually transmitted infection or were terrified that they could have HIV, or they were simply confused and upset after hooking up with a guy a few times, developing feelings for that guy, and then realizing that emotional attachment was the last thing that he wanted. And often when I'd explain to these students the science that you're about to hear tonight, she'd say, "That makes so much sense. Why didn't I know that? Why didn't anybody tell me that?" Well, these were good questions. And I began to wonder, if I'd read years ago in my medical journals about, for example, why girls are so vulnerable to STIs, or about the biochemistry of attachment, which is how we are wired to emotionally connect with someone that we're intimate with, why hadn't this science reached my patients? I mean, they knew all about diet, heart disease, osteoporosis, breast cancer. They knew about a whole range of health issues. So why this ignorance about the consequences of intimate behavior? These questions and others led me to write the book Unprotected. Each chapter describes a patient of mine and how they were harmed by the sexual ideologies and omission of biological truths in sex education. The students that I wrote about in this book made a lasting impression on me. They turned me into an activist. And it's because of them that I'm here today. After Unprotected, I went deeper into what's taught in sex education, especially the websites and books recommended to adolescents. As a physician and a parent, I couldn't believe what I had seen. And that's why my second book was called "You're Teaching My Child What?" So for the past 7 years approximately, I've been studying sex education, how it began and what it is now. I was astonished to realize that sex education is not primarily concerned with preventing disease. Rather, it's a social movement. Its goal is to change society. That was the case 50 years ago when it began, and it's still the case now. Like all social movements, sex education is not based on how the world is. It's based on how the world should be. It's based on a dream, a vision of the perfect world. In this world, there are no substantial differences between male and female. If such differences exist, they are not inborn, they are not eternal, they are due to forces in society against which we are obligated to struggle. In this ideal world, no particular lifestyle is healthier than another. Chlamydia, herpes, HIV, these infect people in a random manner. They are equal opportunity diseases. In this world, an abortion is like a tonsillectomy. This vision appeals to many people because, after all, why should girls pay a higher price for promiscuity than guys? That's sexist. It's not fair. Why should certain sexual encounters be more dangerous than others? That's homophobic. That's also not fair. But this is a made-up world. It doesn't exist. In the real world, the differences between male and female are vast and permanent. One of these differences is that girls have unique biological sensitivities, and early sexual behavior endangers them more than it does boys. That's not sexist. That's something that is seen under a microscope. Furthermore, regarding sexually transmitted infections, certain behaviors and lifestyles are 100% risk-free, and others are treacherous. In the real world, An abortion is devastating for some men and some women. It's a wound they carry with them for their entire lives. These are indisputable facts. There's no debating them. But when the facts, including the biological facts, challenge the sex educator's vision of a perfect world, they are omitted from sex ed. If what's seen under the microscope threatens their dream for society, it doesn't exist. That's why I contend that due to this ideology, young people, especially young women, are being sacrificed on the altar of political correctness. We all detest political correctness, but in my profession, in the medical profession, when information is withheld, if the consequences of abortion, for example, are whitewashed, if a particular sexual act is discussed in a casual way without waving any red flags, lives are endangered. So the goal is to change society and create a world without sexual taboos and restrictions. Each individual, regardless of age, makes his or her sexual choices. Each person decides how much risk he or she is willing to take, and no judging is allowed. These ideas are at the core of modern sex education, or as it's called sometimes, sexuality education. They are very dangerous ideas. 3 groups pay the highest price when biological truths cannot be told, and cradle to grave sexual freedom is celebrated: girls, women, and men who have sex with other men. Please keep in mind that educators describe their material as accurate, ideologically neutral, and in the interest of the students' well-being. They claim to provide your children, your students, with all they need to know to make informed choices. And they insist that they're on the same page as parents. Now, I know that there's lots of variation from one school to the next in what students are taught. But I think it's important for all of you to know that when I reviewed the most popular websites and pamphlets created for young New Zealand people by Family Planning and Rainbow Youth, I found that they are not medically accurate, they are not ideologically neutral, and they do not provide students with all they need to know. I suspect also that what most teens hear at home is very different from what these groups are telling them. So these authorities promise one thing and do another. Where I come from, that's called a hoax. And I know that's a serious charge to make, but I promise you it's the result of years of research and careful deliberation. So what I'm going to do now is lay out the evidence that supports my argument. I must warn you, like Bob did, that I'm about to present some disturbing information, and I apologize in advance, but you must see it because this is what's being recommended to your students. So I'm going to show you some of the troubling things that young people are taught by groups like Family Planning and Rainbow Youth, as well as AIDS Foundation, and then I'll explain the science that's omitted from their message.